Sir, we are live now.
All right, should we get started?
Yeah, Anand.
Awesome. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Ronak Chandrasekhar. I'm a public policy researcher, analyst, and consultant based in Mumbai, and I work on the interconnected spaces of technology policy, climate and energy policy, and geopolitics. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this month's edition of Anekdhara, where we have two incredible speakers with us today to discuss a very timely topic. The ongoing conflict in West Asia and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz created a chokehold on global energy trade and logistics. Among several issues is the impact on global energy trade and markets. An estimated 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas trade happens via the Strait of Hormuz, and nearly half of India's crude imports transits through the strait as well. The resulting impact on a variety of sectors, including India's LPG supply, petrochemicals, fertilizers, and other industries, has been devastating. Among the more immediate impacts are the acute shortage of cooking fuel, which in turn has spurred other crises such as mass labor migration that we haven't witnessed since the COVID-19 pandemic. These events have highlighted India's vulnerabilities to fossil fuel supply chain disruptions and geopolitical volatility. It has raised questions and concerns around India's energy sovereignty and the complexities surrounding its ongoing energy transition. India, notably, is amongst the world's fastest growing economies and one of its current leading emitters of greenhouse gases. Simultaneously, however, India has also made considerable strides in diversifying its energy mix and increasing its non fossil fuel energy generation capacity over the years. This latest disruption has raised fears about potential long term setbacks to this energy transition. While in the short term, we are currently witnessing a spike in the generation and contribution of solar energy, many experts fear that, that these major disruptions, particularly in natural gas and petrochemicals, may lead to India locking in further on its coal energy to ensure a greater degree of energy sovereignty and independence from external shocks. Coal notably currently supplies the most of India's electricity and supports regional employment as well. Yet long-term energy security, sustainable growth, and environmental health requires a swifter transition to cleaner energy. This context presents a complex set of economic, social, and technological hurdles, which are further complicated by geopolitical shocks, everything from the Ukraine-Russia war to the most recent conflict in West Asia. Additionally, scaling renewable energy requires a supporting and enabling policy framework that can ensure that energy remains both affordable and reliable. A few challenges include maintaining grid stability, managing the socio-economic impact on coal dependent communities, and financing the high capital costs of green technology. In this backdrop, we at Anekdhara are incredibly delighted to host this expert discussion on India's energy trajectory and the challenges of transition. Our first speaker today is Dr. M.R. Anand. He's been a member of the Indian Economic Service and served as a principal economic advisor to the Department of Telecom in the Ministry of Communications. He was a senior advisor to the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology and also led Media Lab Asia, which has now been renamed as Digital India Corporation, as its MD and CEO. He has worked as an economic advisor to the Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, an economic advisor to the Ministry of Coal, a director in the Planning Commission, deputy secretary in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and deputy advisor in the Ministry of Power. During his stint in the Ministry of Finance, he also represented India on the G20 Working Group on the International Monetary System. He's previously served as director on the board of several corporate bodies, and since retirement, he's been a member on the evaluation team for the Ministry of Rural Development and also serves on management committees of education institutions, where, amongst administrative duties, he also delivers lectures on economics and public policy. Dr. Anand holds a PhD and MPhil in economics from CDS Trivandrum, a master's from BITS Pilani, and a diploma in enterprise management from IIAP Paris. Dr. Anand, it's a pleasure to host you this morning, and thank you for being here with us. The floor is yours, and we get started with your presentation.
Thank you. Is the presentation visible?
Yes, it is now.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Let me just go to the slideshow.
Yeah, good.
Okay, that's fine. So good morning, everybody. And At the outset, I would like to thank Anekdhara for giving me this opportunity to share my views on a very important subject, as Ronak just mentioned. I'd also like to thank Madhukar for inviting and Ronak for making this possible. Of course, it's a very big honor to be a co-panelist with someone as renowned as Madam Jyoti Parikh, Professor Jyoti Parikh, a world-renowned authority on the subject. So, good morning, madam, and good morning, all the participants who are online. And thank you for joining on this Sunday morning. Anyway, without much ado, I will just straight away get into the presentation. In the first part, I will just give us some preliminaries on what is energy transition. Not that people don't know, but it's useful to spell out and what its dimensions are. What are the climate change commitments that India has made? This is by way of some kind of a background, and what its current energy configuration is. I think we should always know where do we stand if we want to fly somewhere or go by rail for that matter. The other is what has been, the second part is what has been India's energy trajectory. Now, it's always important to know your past so that you don't at least commit the same mistakes. Of course, there's always a small possibility of committing new mistakes, but be that as it may, some lessons are there from the past. Then there is a supply side transition, which is the focus of my presentation, which is the shift to RE. What has been the shift that has taken place, and how has it, what kind of new challenges it is throwing up? That is the second part that I would, third part rather, that I will be dealing with. Now, energy is a very interesting thing. It is the most holistic of the sectors which one can think of. It has got the supply, demand, which are equally complex. Perhaps the demand is even more complex and decentralized. That I will leave it aside because I think that would follow from in the second part of this entire seminar. The last part I'll bring in a little bit, if there is time permitting, I'll deal with some developmental issues which this whole transition is throwing up and will throw up in future. Those will be provided time allows me to do so. So now the question is, what is it that defines energy transition, or do we give it a tight definition? Well, no, not really. All I can say is energy, basically, if in very simple terms, we can say decoupling growth from increasing carbon emissions is the basis of energy transition. Now, that demands structural changes. It demands structural changes, as I mentioned, on the supply side as well as on the demand side. In simpler terms, we can say, okay, it is shift from fossil fuel to renewable, cleaner forms of energy, and also technologies that go with it. It also implies efficiency. It also implies investment reallocation. And investment reallocation is not just on the supply side. It will be investment reallocation on the demand side and for individuals also. A shift from a petrol-based car to a EV car is an investment reallocation at the individual side. But a shift from setting up charging station is an investment reallocation on the supply side, but from the supply side. Okay. So anyway, one can add more to this list. Let's go to the climate change goals and climate change commitments that India has made. I won't go too much into this detail. This is a very large list. Starting from 2014, there were commitments made even before that. That would be very long. I would focus on one made in 2021, which perhaps becomes the lodestone. Achieving net zero by 2070, having 500 gigawatt of non-fuel capacity for electricity generation by 2030, which by and large we have already achieved, 50% of energy by renewables. And then there are other intermediate commitments that have been made, as you can see in this slide. I hope the slides are visible. Ronak?
Yes, they're visible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So 2026, we have given the latest nationally defined commitments. In March 2026, it is just a few days back, we have done a fresh set of commitments. We have submitted that called reduce emission intensity of GDP by 47% vis-a-vis 2005 and achieving 60% non-fuel cumulative power. Please note the words cumulative power capacity by 2035 and create a carbon sink. So these are the fresh set of commitments. Broadly, these are macro level commitments, but they also imply actions at every level, as I said, on the supply and on the demand side. Now, where do we stand? Having made these commitments, one thing is very clear. We say on the aggregate, our per capita emissions are very low. That is true. Our historical contribution has also been low because, well, many of the developed countries have already developed. They've done what they had to do. They've emitted. So our historical contributions have been low. And that has been the sort of a point that has always been made in international fora, saying that there should be what you call, we are not the real culprits. We need to have the responsibility must be common, but it is a, so that is the whole point. So, but at the same time, our aggregate emissions, as I think Ronak mentioned, is very high. That is a function of scale. Scale is important because India is a large country. So a large country with a large industrial base, despite all our grievance about India not having an industry, the fact is we are a large country with a large consumption and industrial base. So it's a large population, and therefore you have a total aggregate is high. So per capita level, we rank low, but aggregates we rank high. Going forward, we will continue to grow. So will the industry, so will consumption. So what happens? This is an international comparison which tells almost the same story. That is energy intensity. If we follow the global trend of falling energy intensity, that is partly to do with technology. Like as successive cars are more efficient, economies have also tended to decline in terms of energy intensity, that is energy consumed per unit of GDP. But per capita consumption in the case of India is much lower than the global average, much lower than the OECD average, but nevertheless is increasing. That's something which is called a catch-up effect, which is taking place in India too. Per capita electricity consumption is also going up, though lower than the global average. This story is also similar. So the total energy consumption in terms of course, converted into an additive form, where you add up all forms of primary energy, is going up. And so that trend is likely to continue in general, unless we are able to do something dramatic. And much of this, as I already mentioned, 97% of the consumption of primary energy is fossil-based, and per capita consumption is going up both in terms of energy as well as electricity. So this is the broad picture where and that where we stand. Now comes the fourth and the last slide on this issue is on the aggregate, we are energy deficient, which means we are energy deficient to the extent of 90% when it comes to oil, 50% to the extent of natural gas, and coal also, it varies between anything between 19 to 24%, depending on the year we take. So on an aggregate, in terms of when you convert them into common units, we are 50% energy deficient. So the core question that comes before us is, how do we grow from here and yet make the energy transition? So that is how I would like to place my the whole debate. The second part is, well, we have gone through a long phase of development, long process of development, which can be broadly divided into 3 or 4 phases. From 1950s onwards, when we had just 2 megawatts of electricity generation capacity and 2 gigawatts, sorry, and much of the energy came even at that point after the independence was from hydropower. There were a few thermal plants then also, but basically it was hydropower, and that too located in the states. It was not states, really speaking. When we started off, we started with over 500 princely states, and we had the center. So much of the action was taking place in what were the states that were getting integrated over time. So we started a journey by creating in the entire 50s, by creating state electricity boards. We created a whole set of public sector institutions. The CEA, it was then called the Central Power and Water Commission. Then the state, and on the manufacturing side, the BHEL, the HEC, Heavy Engineering Corporation, to make the earth moving equipment and the excavating equipment. The BEML for the earth moving equipment. The Regional Electricity Corporation came up later. And in 1971, they nationalized the coal mines. Coal mines were nationalized. Now, many people think that it was a political act. Well, it is correct. But if we go through, having served in the department, I can say that prior to that, much of the coal mining was totally unscientific. It was just like the slash and burn. You just dig a few meters below and you would just take out the mine. an entire part of the eastern India, some parts were burning because of this kind of a strategy. The coal, once it was nationalized, the scientific mining was brought in. Of course, it also brought in problems. With any action, you have other issues. So anyway, the NTPC was brought in 1975 for boosting the thermal energy, and hydro power corporation was brought in. So you have a phase right up to the 70s, have the hydroelectric power generation, which was the backbone of the electricity generation. But by the time you reach 80s, it was basically thermal, which was growing faster. Thermal based on coal and thermal plants, right? And as you come to the 90s, you have a new picture that is emerging. A good part of the projects were being funded by multilateral aid and also to some extent by the bilateral aid. The world situation had changed by then. And this is, I'm again speaking from a bit of a personal experience. There was a shift in the mood in the world post, say, something late 80s. European countries and advanced countries had already dissociated their GDP from energy consumption, which means that energy consumption had slowed down. Their thermal electricity generation companies, equipment companies were looking for markets. In India, we had a situation where there was resistance towards building no hydro projects, which is especially resistance movements like Narmada Bachao. Genuinely so, because there were issues of land acquisition, rehabilitation of tribals, so on and so forth. But the two together sort of provided the push to the thermal plants. And there was a withdrawal of many of the multilaterals agencies from financing hydro projects also. So that is a situation when I happened to be working in one of those ministries which dealt with external financing. You suddenly found that you had actually companies coming into India and wanting to finance thermal plants. So anyway, India also went along with the so-called received wisdom of that period and moved to thermal energy. You had an early, come 90s, you had the global, India's financial crisis and also the macroeconomic crisis, which led to the liberalization of the economy. The first experiment we tried with the liberalization was the bringing in a gas-based plant based purely on imported LNG. I'm saying this especially if there are any younger viewers, they may not remember these things, or they may not have known this. The LNG, brainwave was hit the, I mean, I don't know, the country, I won't say the government. So let's bring in a gas-based thermal power plant. And based on imported LNG, a large plant for those years was set up actually in collaboration with the Enron Dabhol plant. And unfortunately, it went into deep trouble for various reasons: high cost of LNG, problems with contracts, inability to pass on the high cost, and a fixed rate of return that was promised. Anyway, the project went into deep trouble. Then, of course, as we come to 2000, in 2003, the Electricity Act was passed, and the generation, transmission, and distribution were unbundled, which means that different organizations could take up the same activity. Open source, open access was also brought in the electricity network. And as you come to 2005, another brainwave hit us, which is let us put in coastal-based thermal plants. And these were called the merchant plants. And the argument given was Indian coal is poor. It is located in the eastern part. So let us set up imported coal-based merchant power plants. It was actually a good idea because efficiently, these are very efficient because they are very large in capacity, or ultra mega power projects, but they depend on imported plants. Now, this also went through a phase of trouble. Why it went through a phase of trouble? Let me just. So these were the three episodes that we had. One was the hydro, where we went away from hydro at a point, not for any particular reason, because we just had reluctance to deal with the ground issues. In fact, I think looking back, of course, hindsight is always 2020. We were reluctant to look at how to deal with these issues. There were many experts even then who said, let's not do these huge projects. We can do medium and micro and small hydro projects. We can implement them fast. But, well, that went away. In fact, the mood shifted away from hydro. And in fact, the Central Water and Power Commission was bifurcated into electricity, which largely moved to thermal, and the Water Commission. And so as far as the gas was concerned, the lesson we had to learn was, look, it's not possible to rely totally on imported gas and at the same time set up such a large project and unable when we are not able to deal with the contracting issues. A similar lesson was learned with imported coal. In gas, we learned a second lesson in the early 2000s when, based on domestic gas, we put up another set of plants. But that didn't work because the domestic gas production did not go up. What was called the Krishna Godavari gas basin, a second set of gas plants was set up, which somehow could not take up. So today we have sort of stranded assets in gas to some extent. Hydro has stagnated and it remains thermal dominated, right? And even imported coal today, the wisdom has been, let us blend it with domestic coal. So this is where we stand. And this broadly, this picture sort of emerges when you see the trajectory of each of these. You see the power plants for coal. This is the way the capacity has grown, but actually generation has plateaued. You see gas, the installed capacity has come down, but the generation has completely come down. Hydro has stagnated. Now, this is broadly the picture that has emerged. Alongside another important achievement, I mean, of course, these are problems. One need not get too hassled about all these problems because any large trajectory will throw up problems, but these are also achievements and we need to learn from them. One of the important things was when India started off, we had something like almost 30 different small little networks. Then it became 5 or 6 regional networks, all state level networks. Then they became regional networks. Then it has taken us almost 60 years to have a national grid. And that is one of the biggest achievements for India. India today has one of the finest grids, which is a national level unified grid for transmission of power. Without evacuation of power, you cannot have a power system, which is a unified system. And what is the need for a grid? There are areas of shortage, there are areas of surplus. So one place could have a surplus and one place could have shortage, and the grid ensures that those can be transmitted across regions. Now, the challenge going forward is how do you use this grid? They were all oriented towards hydro and thermal projects. Now you have to integrate renewable energy, which is located somewhere else altogether. That is one of the challenges, and I will come to that later. Now, distribution is a slightly different game. It is the last mile of the electricity network. That has also gone through a lot of reform, but it still remains what I call as the weak link or the weak link, whichever way you want to pronounce it, of the entire network. In fact, many of the distribution companies are still in deep difficulties, barring a few. There are some which have improved. The aggregate what are called as the technical and commercial losses have come down, but the fact remains that this is a problem area. I will quickly run through the oil. I won't go into so much detail on the oil side, but one of the important points about oil is the defining thing is that oil has always been a area which has been crisis prone. Every 10 years, we end up having a small little spike in oil, and that leads to a spike in our current account deficit, which translates into inflation and so on and so forth. So, but as of today, as I mentioned, we are moved from a situation of import dependency from 47% in 1990 to 89%. So the entire liberalization period, I don't blame liberalization. It led to growth in automobiles. And I think somebody was mentioning freight traffic has moved away from road to rail to road. The road kilometers have moved, but road kilometers have moved much faster than the rail. In fact, the traffic has moved away from the rail, which is a more efficient way of moving freight and also passengers. We have had a shift towards air, which is also far more energy intensive. Export-oriented refineries have been set up, not a bad thing, but at the same time, it is a fact that all these have led us to a situation where we are today 90% dependent on imported oil. And the key lesson is what do you do with this high level of oil dependency, and which is a function of the scale effects of growth, the compositional effect of growth. I mean, the composition is shifted towards oil-based traffic. The story is the same with gas. From a situation where the gas we were in 2000, just as recently as 2000, you were meeting the entire consumption. Today, you are in a situation where it's 50-50. LPG, I'm talking about, you're made to 66%. LNG and natural gas, you depend to the extent of 50%. Both have been policy driven. LPG has taken place because of social sector programs. Nothing bad about it. But somewhere we need to think how to deal with it macroeconomically, how to sustain it. And it also entails a huge amount of domestic infrastructure, which is a sunk cost. In economics, a sunk cost is something which you cannot recover. Okay, so energy is also needed for the non-energy sector, so to say, fertilizer, petrochemicals, LPG shrinkage to this extent. Now, these are all areas where shifting away are going to be difficult. And biogas, which we were the earliest to start with biogas. In fact, when you look at the energy conservation movement, India was much ahead of the curve. 1970s, we had the Advisory Board on Energy, Petroleum Conservation Association. India built the first semiconductor complex in the developing countries, a national biogas plant. In fact, every probationer, the mandatory requirement was to go and look at the biogas plant. And then when it comes to the liberalization period, the attention shifts to oil, gas, and power. And then, despite that, the fact is that we were early movers in the setting up for Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that these are lessons from history, and that is that even though we were some of the early movers even in both in efficiency terms, we should have persevered on that journey. But anyway, these were sort of changes that have taken place, and we need to learn from that. Coming to the present, what is the energy transition that is taking place? Following our commitments, I won't go into every program. I will go into some of the major ones and what challenges it poses. First, and the biggest element of the transition is the solar. The solar transition is probably one of the most dramatic, if I may say so, which is this one. Let me just adjust this. Yeah, we have moved to something like 150 gigawatts of solar power. Similarly, we have moved to 56 gigawatts of wind energy, and hydro energy continues to stagnate somewhat. Those small hydro is, again, the most interesting part is today, again, hydropower. Everybody is talking about why not use hydropower. Good thing. But the problem is that one of the difficulties with any of the renewable energy sources, especially solar and wind, is its variability. The solar is intermittent, it is site specific, it requires storage. And storage is what we are lacking. And storage is either in the form of batteries, which we don't produce in adequate measure, and we are import dependent on PV cells, and we are dependent on solar foils, and we are also going to have a problem in terms of the high amount of e-waste it will generate. Nobody is still talking about that. Then wind energy is seasonal. There is seasonality and variability, and there is an issue of integration into the grid. This is where, when I look back, the grid development of the grid is perhaps the most important part. But today, hydropower is being posed back as one of the solutions for creating what is called as pump storage, which means that basically you generate electricity, the excess electricity from the renewable, you use it to pump back water, and later when you need it, you pump it down, generate electricity, and feed it back into the grid. That is broadly the idea of the pump storage. Then there are off-grid solutions that have been thought of, which is important, like rooftop solar through the Kusum and the Saubhagya scheme, which are very good, but and that has taken off. And that's the good thing of the recent initiatives. Other transition options I'm not going to talk too much about because they are really still nascent. Tidal energy and geothermal, which are both location specific and which India has not done much on that. Though most recently, geothermal energy, there has been an initiative on that. Biofuels is one area where so coming to the real issue, let us look at just renewables. Wind energy has 25, within the renewables, 25% capacity, 35% of generation. Solar, 67% of the capacity, but only 54% of the generation. And this is the total profile of the renewable energy. But I think the more interesting part is this. When you look at and that tells you what the challenge is. When you take the total picture, this is the latest picture for February, installed capacity is 42% is coal, but generation is 67, along with lignite, it's close to 70. So the entire thermal sector accounts for 70% of the generation, actual energy generated in through electricity. Now, renewable or non-fossil, let's say not fossil fuel, 52% of the energy is capacity is non-fossil, but actually generates 29% because of its variability. And we can't compare the two using plant load factor because coal plants typically operate at least 70% or more. Nuclear plants are operating at 80% and serve as what are called as base load, whereas solar will only give you a very small plant load factor, something like 18 to 20% because of it doesn't work through night. Now, this really is the challenge, and integrating them into the grid is going to be a real issue, and it is already an issue. It is not going to be, it is already an issue because today the distribution companies say, why should I take this power? Because there is a pricing issue, there is variability, and there's a mismatch between there's a mismatch between the growth in the solar capacity and the capacity of the grid to be able to balance the power. Okay, there are transmission challenges because, as I mentioned, the entire transmission system was geared to an earlier version of the directionally it was different. Just like railway lines were in the British period were all set for coal mines in the east. Similarly, the transmission lines are all set up in a particular way. Now, the generation hubs are all in Rajasthan and in Tamil Nadu and Gujarat and so on and so forth. So we need to reorient that. The distribution challenges are very interesting. This is like YouTube. Earlier, there was the person who generated content and someone who distributed the content. They were the same person. Today, anybody who generates can also distribute it back into the grid. So how do you deal with the reverse flow of energy? For that, the grid has to be modernized. A generator of energy and the consumer energy could be the same. For example, a biogas plant or a bagasse plant, which is also generating electricity and consuming it also. So anyway, this is a challenge which I think, so going forward, we are back to a situation where we are looking at hydroelectricity as the way forward, and it is one of the solutions. Only thing is, we will probably have to be very, very sensitive of how we implement it. There are various ways of dealing with it, perhaps extending the life cycle of the existing structures, creating more pump storage on the locations, having mixed solar parks. So the solar, wind integrated with hydro is probably one of the ways of dealing with it. And it is also employment intensive. Of course, having more batteries and etc., lithium-based batteries or any kind of batteries is also there, but we are still some way. Nuclear, there is a nuclear mission which promises to way ahead for providing the base load. A nuclear mission has been set up, but we have to give them time because this depends on 3 S's: security, safety, and safeguards. These 3 issues have to be dealt with. There is no rapid rush in nuclear. And let me say one thing to put the nuclear issue. India today is perhaps one of the few which has the capacity to implement nuclear plants. It is no more the situation of the 1960s and 70s where when we were children, the West was the leader. Today, probably India is the leader in this area because we have actually implemented plants. So I won't say too much on this. There is a new energy policy which fortunately recognizes these issues, which is yet to unfold. It has just been announced. So there's a draft out. So let's see how it works. Biomass to agro waste is probably another area where we were leaders, but perhaps we should go back because as a second grade fallback option, biomass and agro waste is something which we need to use in the form of pellets and even in the form of smokeless chulas as a transition mechanism. Perhaps it is necessary to ensure that the poor don't go back below the poverty line. Okay. Now, other is of course EVs. How am I doing on time? Is it okay?
Yeah, I think we're good. We're still good, okay. Sir. Please continue.
Okay. Then the question is, we are looking at EV as a kind of a magic solution, but really speaking, EVs today actually account for I have not moved the slides. I'm sorry, I think I just missed moving the slides. I just was talking. So yeah,
No,
this is the
are we on the correct one now? Yeah.
Yeah, this is what tells you what is the share of generation. This is 42% capacity, 70% for thermal, 47%, and non-fossil is 52%. This is only 29%. This is the challenge that we face. The second is how to integrate renewable into the grid. This is the other issue. How to deal with it, because much of the transmission system was, I'll just go back slightly. Transmission was geared to an earlier, sorry, I was not moving the slides. Transmission was geared to an earlier system, and distribution has to deal with how to deal with reverse flows, how to deal with evacuation. These are current challenges, and there is grid congestion. So we should not have a situation where we have stranded assets like the way we have had for gas, for imported coal, and even for hydro. So even then, transmission and distribution were the bugbears of the system. Today, we should not have this. In fact, we are already facing those situations. We are back to a situation where we are looking at hydro as one of the options for creating pump storage. We are looking at nuclear as the way out for providing the base load. A new nuclear policy has been brought in in the form of the Shanti Act, and fortunately, NTPC has gone in for collaboration with the Nuclear Power Corporation. We don't have an issue with the technology. India is one of the lead sources. There's a new nuclear energy policy that has been brought in, and hopefully we will be able to deal with that. The biomass is also an area where we need to provide enough support, because this is one area where probably, again, we had some amount of leadership at a point, but again, we need to bring back some of these solutions as intermediate solutions to deal with if there is a gas shortage. We need to deal with that. Now, I'll come back to EVs, which I was talking about. EVs is an area where we are seeing it's a lot of media hype. We think that everybody is going to be EV, but today, even in terms of total number of vehicles, it just accounts for 5%, right? So we are short on critical components. Batteries accounts for about 30–40%, and there's a heavy reliance on imports. It exposes India to global price swings. We have already seen a certain holdback on magnets, on the holdback on critical components, and this is going to be a problem area. So fortunately, there is a PLI scheme to deal with the manufacture of components. But what my argument is, we need to embed both EV and EV policy as a part of the overall transportation policy. Ethanol we have done well. We have gone in for an active ethanol blending policy. We have reached a stage where we are blending almost 20% of the ethanol, but it has its own challenges. What is the challenge? If you want to go further from this, we need to answer a very simple question. Do we want to get locked into IC engine manufacturing economy? The more we invest into ethanol, you see, energy sector is not like buying tomatoes. It is something where the infrastructure and the assets live for 10 to 20 years. The entire infrastructure will get built around ethanol. The IC engine manufacturers will continue, maybe modify their engine. Beyond 20, you will need to modify the engines. So they will have to invest money into it. Then you get into a situation which is called a lock-in. So that is why we need to look at EV ethanol as a part of the overall transportation policy, and not just the standalone solutions. Now I come to the developmental side. Let us look at what an average consumer spends in terms of fuel and transport. Today, a person is spending something like, in the rural side, fuel and light, they're spending something like 5.6.1% in the rural, 5.6% in the urban areas, around 8% on transport. And so fuel and light, we are spending something like 13 to 14% on the aggregate. That's a very large proportion, and this is an average consumer expenditure-based expenditure. This is for which underestimates, in my view. Now, therefore, we will have to focus a lot on public transportation to have a transition path. It is not possible for a country of India's continental size to base its entire transition based on individualized transport. And this is exactly what has happened from 90s, that is the liberalization period, to now. There's been a complete switchover from, in the urban areas, from mass transport to private individual modes of transport. And this has been, I would say, policy driven because of the expansion of the auto industry, which has given jobs, but it has also made us oil dependent. So now we will have to rethink in terms of our transportation policy, both for within urban areas, within urban rural areas, and for long distance areas. Another area which I would like to quickly just show is the material transformation. In fact, way back in the 1975 or something like that, or a little later, the UNEP even then had come up with a very interesting study that 70% of the total energy consumed is in transforming materials. And this is where the Gandhian philosophy is very important. We need to go back to looking at what materials do we use. And I think on this, again, we have switched completely to petrol-based materials. And whether it's synthetics, lubricants, chemicals, coating materials, these are hard to substitute. Perhaps the recycling and the 3 Rs is something which should become. Let me say one thing, which is very important, which I think you can read the rest. But the most important part is today's tax treatment doesn't make a distinction between a recycled product and a similar product. Even if I use a recycled metal, the product will be as per the HS code. I think we'll have to rethink how to make sure that there is an incentive for the industry to use recycled materials, which shifts them back from extremely petrol dependent, or oil dependent materials or other materials. Some things are being done. The bamboo has again been brought back to producing biofuel, but those are still very much on the sidelines. Then there's a non-energy consumption about which we need to do something, which is use of petrochemicals for making fertilizers and so on and so forth. There is no simple solution. Again, as I said, circular economy is the way out, but we still are very far away from that. I think it will also involve a lot of transition in terms of training and redeployment. I think coal-bearing areas particularly are going to be first hit, even if as we move towards away from coal, we will need to have at least a 10-year plan on how to transit from coal. Today, there's a direct employment is something like 3.7 lakhs. Please, if anybody visits a coal-bearing area, and I used to have a very interesting discussion with a lot of people, the typical fund managers who would come and visit you. I said, have you ever seen a mine? And they would come to find out how much is disinvestment taking place or something like that. Typically they'd come and visit ministries. I'd say, have you ever seen a mine? Virtually no fund manager who was an energy expert has ever seen a mine. I mean, I'm not saying it for everybody, but this is just an anecdotal kind of a thing. The point is the entire townships depend on this. We will have to figure out what to do with it. But the more useful thing is their entire coal industry, entire energy industry has one of the finest manpower in terms of technical competencies. They can easily be redeployed. And more importantly, the land, the mined out land, today there is no clear policy on how to use the mined out land. There are some tentative initiatives that have been done. So the last part, I'm coming to the last 2 slides.
Dr. Anand, just sorry to interrupt, but if we're slowly approaching the end of the time.
Yeah,
so
I'm also approaching the end of my slides.
Thank you.
So we can't dissociate energy from the security angle. I just want to show you just one graph that I drew in the morning, just for the giving the shock impact, as they say. Every crude oil price has always coincided with a sharp drop in the current account deficit. This, if I extend it back right up to 1970, the pattern will be exactly the same. I can draw the GDP also along with it. It will show the same thing. Okay, so we can't take it away from energy security. So basically what it means is we have a real challenge on our hands, and there's no point wishing away. No major economy has been able to scale up GDP, increase per capita income, redirect energy, increase manufacturing, reduce resource use, contain carbon emission all at the same time. And therefore, it looks like a very challenging journey. Best of luck. We need to be at it. We need not get discouraged because it is also giving us a lot of opportunities. These are all the things which we would like to keep in mind. I'd like to thank you very much. And I'll leave you to the last part of the slide, which is the add-on slide, that consumption is and demand side is as important. And I hope this discussion on demand will probably be, it will throw some light on this issue also. Thank you very much. And
Thank you so much, Dr.
thank you for
Anand.
this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing Professor Jyoti Parikh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anand. That was such a brilliant presentation. It's always great when speakers take the time and energy to make these informative and well-curated slideshows for all our viewers. I must admit, some of the time management issue was on my part because I just got lost in all of the information that you had that even I lost track of time. But thank you so much for a lovely presentation. I think the broad historical overview of how we've come here was incredibly important. And I particularly enjoyed how you provided those case studies about the three different episodes and how those specific cases impact long-term trajectory. It really sets the stage for our next presenter, which is Professor Parikh. Professor Jyoti Parikh is the Vice Chair of Integrated Research and Action for Development and was a recipient of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, which was awarded to the authors of the IPCC. She is a distinguished figure in climate change and energy policy. She was a member of the Prime Minister's Climate Advisory Panel and has held advisory roles at the Friends of the COP26 in Glasgow, at the World Bank, the US Department of Energy, and the European Union, and various UN agencies, and has also been a distinguished member of several panels, high-level panels constituted by the Government of India. Professor
Stop.
Parikh,
Okay.
Professor Parikh obtained her MSc from UC Berkeley and her PhD in theoretical physics from the University of Maryland. As a founding director of IRADE, she has authored numerous publications and books spanning areas such as energy, climate change, urban resilience, environmental economics, and more. She has served as a senior professor at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, IGIDR, worked at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria, and has served in the Planning Commission as a senior energy consultant. She was a visiting professor at the Institute for Advanced Studies at the United Nations University in Tokyo and at Yale University. Professor Parikh, it's a pleasure to have you today. As someone who's been a student of energy policy, also, it's a real pleasure to host you. The floor is yours, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a minute. Are we? I'm not able to. Yeah.
Ma'am, any problem with the share screen?
Just you can hear me, no?
Yes, you're audible, ma'am.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm glad to be a part of this August list of past speakers. And I congratulate also my previous speakers for bringing out in detail Indian energy scene and its institutional issues and how it reached where it did now, with what difficulties and so on. And yeah, people can enjoy that also. I was told to little bit more, go more into global areas and bring it back to India, of course, later. So let me start with what I think is the reason for why is the share why
Ma'am, your presentation isn't visible at the moment.
can you see it now?
Not at the moment, ma'am.
No. Up. Oh,
You want to share, madam?
yeah. Share.
First, you start PowerPoint.
A second. Yeah, it's open.
Yeah, now come to Zoom and click share at the bottom.
On the Zoom application, at the bottom, you'll have a share
Bottom,
screen.
you'll have share.
I had to close this. Sorry, I didn't close it. and share. Now it's a
This is co1.
It's just, yes, it's
Yeah,
just.
you shared now.
So, yeah, what are the broad reasons why the civilization has moved from one energy resource to another? And it can give some idea of what can happen in future and what is in store, how some other applications in the world, such as mobile and telecom relationship is coming. That kind of similar relationship is now being seen with energy. And so let us look at some past examples. So this is the first of all, the energy transition which is happening now is not the first, nor would it be the last. But and you can see for millennia we people use biomass, and that was uh, basically solid biomass, and it's still around. It is with reducing shares and with new technology, but I'm now talking about the raw biomass that people used to use. It has it's renewable, but it's with a long lead times, and it's dispersed supply chain, and this is the major reason it is out, is the family labor that went into it. Although it did not require much investment, and it's a very low energy density, and the equipment that was used was chullas and bhattis, and accompanied by indoor pollution. People valued their time, did not value time, or did not care for indoor air pollution. And so in India, although worldwide we talk about that fossil fuel entered in 1900, but in India it came into 1950. Actually, some fossil fuel came much earlier. Coal came a little bit later, after 1850, and it is the first fossil fuel. Coal was the backbone of industrial revolution. It was not called energy transition, but it was an era of innovation, and that required huge stock of non-renewable energy. The other one was based on flows, energy flows. So supply chain was mines, processing, transport, all that had to be developed afresh. In an innovation took place on both supply side and the demand side. The supply means producers' perspective, and demand is consumers' perspective. And supply side, we had plethora of innovation items like boilers, furnaces, turbines, and this is a large scale concentrated development of electricity and many other things, also power plants, railways, steam engines, industries, homes. So what was the problem? Well, it was high investment also, and medium energy density. It was 15 to 30 gigawatt per ton, but efficiency increased. Earlier biomass efficiency, I pointed out, I think 5 to 15%. So the share of fossil fuel is still 20%, and it is vanishing from developed world, but and especially it's also vanishing from transport and building sector. The Yeah, but the reason why coal went out was the inconvenience, both in terms of it did not kind of put the energy in people's hands. Like, for example, oil and gas brought personal transport, and every person can dream of their own vehicles. So that was actually not possible. Earlier, you had railways and so on, but that was public transport. So oil and gas was still again still non-renewable. They are still ruling that they are not yet declining much. They are declining, but because more is the coal decline is taking place little faster, and what happened is that you have now liquid and gas forms of energy, and that began with huge stocks, but now they were in different countries. So here the entry of countries' monopoly become sharper. Supply chain required prospecting, oil wells, refineries, pipelines, shipping routes. All these were developed, and together with the steam engine was replaced with internal combustion engine, and supply chain was yeah, that was not. Yeah, also the well, one can say utilization chain. So boilers, furnaces, turbines, pipeline ships, and shipping routes were there. Power plants and industries, personal transport were possible. Warm homes became clean. So cleaner, everything becoming cleaner is it is a trend you can see. Reducing labor is another trend, a major one. So high investment is changing power structure in the world. It had the big seven companies came and oil barons started ruling. Then high energy density, it was delivering 44 gigajoules per ton instead of 2025 by coal, and gaining efficiency of use was also 35 to 70%. So less pollution, cleaner homes, and it's still ruling today, large share assumption of interdependence world leading to current turmoil. So there was that assumption was there. There are also other, I don't want to go, I just wanted to flag this in a quick manner. So I'm not going into all of these individually, but some of that was also mentioned by Mr. Anand earlier, but still significant and main resource for many hydropower, but it's again located in some countries, not in other countries. And it could be it was very high in Laos, Bhutan, and growing in Nepal. Brazil, Norway, of course, they are big ones. But what happened is that the long gestation periods, high investment, and environmental concerns are still looming large on this sector. We are talking about, so the nuclear concerns for radiation, long gestation periods, high costs and security also are factors why its share, despite its technical potential for is very high. And in fact, at one point we thought this is energy too cheap to measure, but yet when real life came, the gestation period, it took 10 years to make a nuclear power plant in India, and some I think some of it was a little bit overhyped, the Chernobyl and so on. Well, it was a real problem which would have been solved much earlier, but wasn't. But now the hope is a little bit hope for revival is there for small modular reactors and thorium cycle that India is trying. And large countries like France, Japan, USA, large demand rather, so they and of course have good shares. India has 3%, 5%. The thing is that electricity itself does not have a very big share. You find it depends on how you measure primary energy or final energy, but there is a large portion which is not electricity. Significant contributions has done by energy efficiency all along in cutting the electricity growth with megawatts, we call it, because it's not seen in any list of where the energy comes from. But I think just to give you one example, of course, this example goes to all home appliances, car fleet, vehicle fleet, and so on. Everything is, and industries and so on. Almost all sectors are no longer the same as they were 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. And it's a continuous process. It's contributing a lot, but unfortunately, it's not really measurable. So LED bulbs made it possible to bring 100% electricity access without much overall increase in demand for additional investments, because one LED bulb, if replaced, could replace 9 to 10 incandescent bulbs. So it got without any much increase, it would not have been possible, I would say, to do it in such a short time. In some sense, India has had latecomers advantage. Biofuels are also there, and the DRE biofuels such as biogas, gasifiers, these are also still there, but sometimes they are satisfying demand in rural areas, and sometimes they are not even reflected in the national statistics, almost as, of course, as biogas, but in the entry in the energy statistics is sometimes not, because of some calculation problems. Every source in the energy mix helps. So I'm not saying that they are not unimportant, but when you trace the large changes, one has to make some assumptions. So, but now after oil and gas's entry, the big change, the big concern kind of shook the world actually. And between 80s and 90s, they were debating whether it's warming or cooling, but finally they decided it is climate change. And it could sometimes lead to a lot of cooling as well. And 1992 was a big issue of sustainable development term was coined, because it was recognized that it was not just a issue of weather or energy. It was the how energy was consumed almost 80-90% by developed countries, whether it was steel, cars, aluminum, you name it. We did work on that for the Rio conference, and we presented a book called a report called Consumption Patterns that affect the climate change. And how it so common but differentiated responsibility term kind of gained the ground in this conference. Annex 1 countries, then there was a list of list of Annex 1 countries, which were developed countries. They had to return to 1990 level by year 2000, but slowly and gradually they refused to believe that they are in a separate category, especially because China at that time, India and China, had roughly the same per capita energy consumption and slightly more emissions by China in GHG emissions. But it just took off the same pattern as the developed world, and with that kind of population they had, it was difficult. Well, in between, there were many other protocols and meetings, $100 billion fund. But I think what brought solar renewable revolution was because of the 2015 NDC commitments by all countries. So all countries suddenly, anyway, solar and wind prices were falling, but this agreement gave a signal that this is a global need, and China led the transition, I must say. and the prices fell so sharply that it became worthwhile for people to engage with that. And at 2020, there was a COP26 where I was a member of this their committee, and I must say, no, the Prime Minister surprised people in net zero by announcing net zero targets. You are so back to uh, yeah, oh, sorry. Is it
Sadik ji, there's some, if you could mute your mic, please.
so? Harry? So renewables are include solar and wind. I right now because I have to hurry up, so much time has gone. So, but all have some renewables. So it's a more egalitarian with everybody have that possibility to do something with that energy and not have the total dependence. Countries, islands like Maldives have 99% energy is imported. So you can imagine what they must be going through. And it remained for a long time on the decentralized application in the margin. So dryers, solar heaters, they are necessary innovations. But they did not, the point is that current renewables provide only electricity. And our demand side is not electrified as much as we thought we could do it in a fast way, but this has not happened. In fact, induction cooker we were talking about in 2019, 18 perhaps, and then we were talking about electric cars much earlier. But these things did not take place. Even today, they are hesitating. For what reason, I don't understand. We had 2030, 30% by 30 by 2030 slogan, but somehow it did not go through. And previous the speaker pointed out some reasons. Rapid growth post-Paris Agreement on climate change was because, now involved very high innovation content, basically in the semiconductors and all size, but that brought down, that made it possible to have all sizes of power plant, whereas coal, let's say you have 110 megawatt, 220 and 600, 500 and so on, large, but here you can go from 1 kilowatt to 1,000 megawatt in any denomination you want. And it could be done in industrial scale or at home level, and you can have wind and solar parks. Yeah, so it's a flexible, a more flexible system based on modular but it requires prospecting rare minerals when you go further, high-tech semiconductors, high innovation, and AI content. So we have to keep fingers crossed whether this will keep growing as it is now. But let's hope that with high investment, we may be able to put more low gestation period. That's another thing. People did not want to wait for 5 years, that it took coal plants to build 10 years for nuclear and pipelines and shipping and so on. And it is far more user friendly to assemble. Very low level people come to your house and fix it. And low energy density, GJ per ton. Efficiency, now we're back to dispersed energy, flow-based energy, but every flow has to accompany with peak stock, and otherwise it doesn't work. So I will come to that. User equipment doesn't have to change, but new era of freedom for consumers. Whereas so active management is a prosumer. You can also choose not to do anything, but so all can participate in this reduced gaps between developing and developed because it happened simultaneously. Almost India, China got to the same time as the others, and already they are leading leading these revolutions. Similarly, wind, it's to a degree, their degree varies, but at least and below certain levels, it does not work also. But at 100-meter power density, it is also well spread. And Africa, in both, you might have noticed solar and wind. Africa is well endowed, and many times people used to say this is Saudi Arabia of renewable energy, and still maybe something can be worked out with them, but you have to work it out. So we have a renewable energy has a guaranteed at price zero, lifetime of 20 to 30 years. You don't have to, once you set up the system, you are free to do what you want, and available at the site of the plant, and so on. But the problem is it's not available for 24 hours. And the way you have to manage is a very, very different thing. I'll come to that later. And high site uncertainty is there. It is working here, but the next house, it may not work because of trees or something. So you have to be very careful in choosing the site, and high capex and no flexibility. But let's hope that it works. So now this is the general technology evolution and its causes, socio-economic causes. But what's the real thing in the ground? On the ground is that world energy consumption has slowed down. If you see many small countries, I mean European countries, both I mean their levels are with population growth as well as in total energy. It is the kind of and the US also has stabilized, although the GDP hasn't. GDP has gone up considerably on this. But of course, developing countries are going to rise, and how much it depends on when they join the development stream. And India joined later. So as I said, there is some latecomers advantage. You start with people acquire refrigerator of a very good type, good variety than previous people did. So there is a advantage of that. So that was the per capita, that was, but renewable energy generation, as I said, India, this is 21 or 2, I had done this, but if you upgrade, India is now third perhaps, and Brazil has a traditional very high hydro, and Canada has also traditionally big hydro. They are two big hydro countries. But as also Dr. Anand pointed out, India's responsibility of emissions, we have to see it in a cumulated way. And this is only cumulated from 1990 after the Rio, as per the Rio Convention. But if you cumulate from 1800 onwards, then this is much different. The USA is much higher little higher than China. And so these are India has just crossed Japan recently. Otherwise, it is in line with the smaller countries, but still distant third. So now we come to the problems with working with renewable energy. And this is, I'll just now come back to a little bit of India's case, as Dr. Anand repeatedly said, power grid is very good in India. National grid works, and you have every 15 minutes market price available and traded. So that's markets are very sound and transparent. You can have so currently, I forgot the date here, but not. It's a very recent one. 65 gigawatt was sell bid, but purchase bid was 10 gigawatt. So these are this is the all power. Most of the power is produced by power purchase agreement people, and they are getting paid for that. But market free merchant power cannot enter into the system at this kind of prices, where you can't make money during the daytime because the price is 30 paise, and night time the price is 10 rupees, but you can't produce. So this market can change if you have now next level of innovation, which is storage. So storage, we should have planned perhaps that every megawatt should have been accompanied with some 30% first increasing and then leveling it off, increasing a percentage of solar. So in the beginning should have been 1 megawatt to 1 megawatt storage, but simultaneous development did not happen. There are many storage options, not just battery, but battery is fastest growing segment, and lithium ion batteries now, right now, this has gone down further. Gone up, but price has gone down. Ideal for short-term grid balancing, and global energy storage development is expected to reach 1,000 gigawatt hour by 2030. That's small by percentage, but a big change from what it is now. And then I should put pumped hydro storage should have been next. But it can, we are also now looking at it, and in fact, CEA has got 60 applications of closed loop hydropower. So certainly there are limitations on the river-based hydropower, but and because of the environmental constraints, farmers, rights and over water and so on. So to stay away from that, one could have isolated two reservoirs. You can fill up with any type of water, rainwater harvesting, treated wastewater, or brought from somewhere, because all you need is it going around like a pumped hydro storage. Each time you lose some energy, but it comes out of that system, and it provides 90% theoretically, but I found that people are talking about 80% in real terms. You have also thermal energy storage. Some people use for warming the houses and so on. And last but not least is hydrogen storage. Now electricity provides electrons, and we replaced the molecules. I'm sorry, I'm a little I'm physicist, but it's not difficult to understand, that were contained in oil, gas, and coal cannot all be replaced by electricity. Though I'm coming to the next one of how one can electrify all the sectors, but hydrogen can be potential for long-term seasonal energy storage, transportation applications. It's already working. You have hydrogen buses, hydrogen planes, and so on. And what is more important is that this replaces oil and gas. I feel that hydrogen for electricity is not a priority. We should use it for replacing oil and gas, and solar can replace coal. So, but hydrogen is not yet tested in a big way. So we are still waiting for that to happen. Now, power market I mentioned. Why is power market necessary? Because constantly central planning that has created, in fact, some very good institutions. We have to still it is limitations, and we need to have market instantly responding markets, and that's time of use pricing means that people know that it's going to be 11 rupees, so they'll charge your their vehicles during the daytime. So customer response, it is better if the people know what it costs every, what it brings in the market, and the market is prices are posted and it's transparent, so I can even plan before buying my vehicles. As it shifts consumption patterns towards off-peak hours, load prediction has to be improved. There is a day-ahead market. There is a round-the-clock market. So there are different types of markets are being developed so that. So right now, suppose my diesel generator or captive generator didn't work, then how can I buy immediately to patch up? So that's all this can be done with that. Resource prediction has to be improved, and deviation settlement. This is we have good regulatory system which promotes market disciplines and transparency. And people are gradually obtaining more trust and efficient operation. And but that we would require, I must say, a lot of AI as well, because every storage is a generator in some sense when you ask it to feedback. And so is the big solar owners and so on. So all these generators together supply the system, then they need to have identity. And so all that can be done through the digital technologies. This is smart meters is for the consumers' information. Smart grids will efficient allocation of energy resources. What happens also is that the standard capacity you have to minimize. Standard capacity means ki I put fossil fuels, and now you come back with saying that you can't sell during the solar hours. So then its profitability is compromised. So how can they coexist? And they would have to coexist. There is a expansion of solar resources, so that it can be planned in a proper way with the digital technologies. So luckily we have good power exchange posting prices every 15 minutes. We are trying to make it to 5 minutes. There is a big data management issue here, as I just mentioned, labeling generators, labeling consumers, and how they can together market, just like the stock market, selling and buying bids. Millions of customers exchange, participate in that exchange. And so you have you need proper load dispatch center which maintain grid stability. That's very, very crucial because we are in a very sensitive area here. Solar can disappear with a cloud, or wind can also fall down. And so in this condition, how can you mobilize suddenly generators, other generators, and so on? So in some sense, there is a need for, steady flow of energy that used to be the hallmark of earlier system. But when you change it from stock to flow, this is what is happening. Optimize power generation and transmission to minimize costs and emissions. So they have to respond to grid distribution disturbances and prevent outages. So this is a big work. And now this is in future maybe currently going on some places, but blockchain technology is also peer-to-peer energy trading. We are trying now actually already. I mean, I'm now speaking of India. Uh,
Professor Parikh?
uh,
Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to flag that we're nearing the end of our time and would want to move to
I
Queenie as
also,
well.
this is my last capsule. So now, I would not spend time in this. I'll just say that, as rightly pointed out earlier also by Dr. Anand, we need to have demand side technologies. Now, demand side also has to respond by electric vehicles, electric efficiency, electric cooking, rooftop solar. And so demand side, by that I mean consumers and prosumers now are very much thought of. And finally, the shift with internet is another internet is another tool in our kitty. So finally, what are the social issues here? This is a social transformation that's happening, not just energy transition or energy transformation. We have job losses in fossil fuel supply chains. We have stranded assets, and these are some of the challenges. Skill mismatch. People don't have. Yeah, there are not trained people in some of these areas that I just mentioned. And it would also need financial restructuring. You would need, I mean, these challenges can be met, the social challenges can be met by some of these measures. Uh, so, so green jobs and so on would be there, but not as much as the fossil fuel jobs. Daily, they were digging out 2 million tons to supply 700 million tons in a year. So that was different types of jobs. This is for certain, for labor, hard labor. Well, I covered the whole gamut of changes we are going through, society is going through, and India is doing well in keeping up with the world in this particular case. Fortunately, that wasn't the case earlier. In 1950, we began with 1 or 2 power plants and amounting to 2 gigawatts. Now we have 500 or more gigawatts. So you can see how fast we were able to cover the gap that we had inherited, or we were at, whatever the way you want to look at. So I hope these large transitions that are happening over centuries and over the world help you get some idea about what to expect in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Parikh. That was an incredible presentation and really complemented what Dr. Anand had set forth by providing a global perspective as well as a lot of the technical perspective as to how these challenges need to be scaled into these different kinds of energy. First and foremost, I would really like to thank both of you for these incredible presentations. It's particularly useful to have these carefully curated PowerPoints with so much data, which I know that has been painstakingly made by both of you. So we really, on behalf of all of the viewers, I really thank both of you for such insightful presentations and all of this knowledge. We'll quickly move to questions and question and answer. And there are several questions that many of our viewers have raised. So instead of typically, I like to ask my questions first, but I'll try and be unselfish this time and first platform some of our viewers. So Shantanu has asked if India can realistically move away from coal in the next 2 decades, or do you anticipate our pathway in the future to be clean coal and renewables mixed together as the practical way forward? So I was curious to get both of your opinions on this.
Well, my view would be the latter, because I think we have a priority to get out of oil and gas first. So I would put priority on oil and gas. I know it may sound like delaying climate change commitments, but well, who is following them anyway? But I forget that comment. But I think that even doing so with clean coal and with tools we have with the power markets and so on, we are doing well in decarbonization, and we will do it differently, but we will be there.
Sorry, before I get Dr. Anand's comment, Professor Parikh, would it be possible to end screen sharing on your side?
Oh, sorry.
No worries at all.
Yeah.
You should have a stop screen share option on your Zoom window.
Share. Oh, I need to stop share.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry about that interruption. Dr. Anand, your comments on that question, please.
I think I would broadly agree with what Professor Parikh said, that there is something which is desirable, something which is practical. We have to see, the thing is about policy choice, you have to make that choice. That is where the difference between your academic freedom and actually taking a decision is. And we really need to figure out a way of getting out of oil. And that's very critical, because which are the worst consequences is something which we need to first see. And I think it's on the balance, perhaps what she said is the way out. We have to work on using clean clothes, that is there, but eventually we have to phase it out.
Right.
That direction is very clear.
No doubt about that. It's just a transition period. 2060 तक तो हो जाएगा, but I mean, I will talk about doing it in 40 versus 50 or 50 versus 55, like that. So it's a matter of speed. What
Right.
you choose, how to do it.
Right. There's also a related question. Anuradha Duda has asked, is coal gasification a bridge to a cleaner future, or is it a costly detour that locks us into coal under what is considered a greener label, coal gasification specifically?
Dr. Anand can reply differently, perhaps he had, but I think that rather than working only through coal electrification, coal gas is not a bad idea. It's better perhaps. But it does lock us into that kind of gas, and sometimes investment is also high that those kind of commitments for small doing it for few years doesn't make sense. So from that point of view, I would say one has to do proper analysis of this.
Fair. Dr. Anand?
In fact, today itself, there's a very interesting piece in Hindu, which is a heading: mitigating fertilizer crunch via coal gasification.
Exactly.
I mean, in fact, a far cry. I mean, it's a nice long piece written by somebody.
Different from for doing an industry. I mean, electricity.
Yeah. So this is this debate has been on, and I think this is a problem. That's why I said energy is not like buying tomatoes. Anything you put money, you have locked into it. If you put in a power plant, you will have to put in a mine. Otherwise, you will have an idle power plant. So similarly, coal gasification is an expensive route. I mean, I'm not denying the concern of the Anuradha. I think she's asked this question. But these are calls you have to take. So see, if tomorrow we have no gas supplies, we may have to find an option. So I don't think the answers can be commonsensical. They'll have to be based on some calculation and say, we are going to phase it out in 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years or whatever it is, some period.
Right.
So these are to be based on some technical calculation, which may, with the benefit of hindsight, be proved wrong. That can also happen. But there has to be some plan. And it's like having a map. And at the end of it, you find the map is wrong, but at least you'll know that the map is wrong. So it's better to have a map. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Right. Before moving on to some questions around systemic challenges, there's another thematically similar question on alternative sources. Dr. Rajan has asked, and perhaps Professor Parikh might be best placed to answer this. Dr. Rajan has asked if you could explain the promise of thorium as an alternative to uranium, and whether it's a good news and whether it allows us to tap potential. If I know Dr. Anand also touched upon nuclear, so perhaps if we could have Professor Parikh respond to this question first, and then Dr. Anand.
Oh, thorium gives more neutrons than you started out with, so it kind of perpetuation is easier, and then it is safer way of, I mean, in terms of security concerns people have with nuclear fuel diversions and so on. But yeah, it is a good option. Only thing is that usually in the energy field, things happen in all countries, or so just one country doing this with no interest from anybody else is not something that was happened. Everybody contributed somewhere something. So and the thing moved on. Here we are kind of we have so much monopoly over thorium that
Right.
so that's we have to be eklo jane re possibility we have. Yeah.
That really, Dr. Anand, that really dovetails into the next section, because of course there's the technical potential, but then there's also the political economy side of how that can be tapped into.
I think she is using Ekla Chalo. I think she has summed it up in 2 words. That's all. So, well, Ekla Chalo has an advantage if you can actually establish it. Uh, the thing about, I think I did mention it in one of my slides. Unfortunately, technology development has a long incubation cycle. And in India, we have a sense of impatience where after some time, governments, all governments tend to say, "Arey, kya ho raha hai? Jaldi batao. Otherwise, we'll stop you from." So the nuclear cycle has been a lot of experiments, lot of failed. I'm not a nuclear person at all, but here also we have reached what is called as the second stage of the. So the thorium is going to be the next stage. I think that question somebody else has asked down below. So thorium is going to come into the next stage. So we'll have to let these people experiment, maybe even fail. We don't know. But I think they are very much on track for this. So Ekla Chalo will be in the issue. There'll be nobody else. But so what? Let's try. Anyway, it's one of the tracks. So.
Yes. Moving on to like broader systemic challenges, and both of you in your presentations focused a lot on both the global as well as the domestic challenges to on a systemic level. We have a couple of questions from Shubha and Bhushanam that touch on this idea of balancing equity with the correct form of like substitution. So, for instance, Shubha has highlighted that our policy choices are shaped by a trilemma of energy supply, affordability, and and reliable transmission. Similarly, Bhushanam has asked, do we focus more on disparate expansion, or are we rationally substituting our energy sources? So I was curious to know about how we balance, based on these questions, how do we balance these three factors in the long term, where we want to maintain reliability, we want to maintain profitability, we want to maintain equity and access. These are very, very difficult considerations. How do you see that shaping, and where do you see us tilting one way more than the other?
Affordability is the key issue for India. Otherwise, you cannot move, and that is why the biomass continued and low access of electricity continued. But when LED came, it became affordable, and it not only reduced the consumer's expense but also producer suppliers' expenses, because he had to supply very little energy to let it go. So, and the ESL model of aggregating demand is something I don't know why we don't try for electric cookers, but induction cooker could have been now millions of them need to be rolled out so that every LPG ship, our fate does not hang, is not balanced or hanging on every LPG ship. So I think I would consider affordability is a key criteria, and that's how India is moving, making development. And also other countries tell me, it says when India does something, we believe that it's good for us, because if Germans tell you that we are willing to pay $25 for megawatt hour, we are not. So that's the kind of expectation from India people have. Or even China has a government backing everything. But here we are also part market, so it's more assured that if India works in India, it works elsewhere.
Dr. Anand, your comments?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a typical macroeconomist question. Well, and it's also a policymaker's dilemma, which means or trilemma.
Dilemma,
So absolutely. So I think you hit the point that on the when it comes to taking a policy decision, you have to balance all the three. But on the ground, balancing is always very difficult because the person who is both implementing or facing the challenges are different persons. Meaning they don't worry about your trilemma; they just want the energy. So the concern of the question is very much well placed. And ultimately, yes, implementation is the issue. And I think the question has been answered in a way by very, very effectively by Professor Parikh, which is that the LED was a great experiment. And in fact, it showed us the way that when you create the market and who creates the market, the government has a very important role, both through push and pull, either by making it mandatory as well as incentivizing the creation of a market. In fact, even the old Amul was a creation of a market. Then it became very cheap for anybody to set up a milk plant. Why? Because a market for milk was created. So similarly, for the market for LED was created. The first market was created. Today, you don't have to tell people go and buy an LED bulb because nobody is going to buy an incandescent light, and fortunately not a CFL, which never took off, frankly. So the market creation role, just as well. We didn't get locked into CFL, which was marketed at one point. So, so I think we need to create the market which creates affordability. Without that, it won't work. But I think I'll agree with the person who has asked this question.
So this actually helps us move into a different question that both I had, and it was also raised in the chat by Mr. Srinivasa Rao, who asked broadly, and I'll try and refine it with my own question as well, who highlighted broadly that there's financial stresses in discoms, there's policy uncertainty, a high import dependence, and these are broad systemic challenges that we have a tough way to get out of. If I may make that question a bit more specific. Both your presentations highlighted our history with figuring out essentially the role of the private sector as well, right? And particularly, like you mentioned, in terms of creating a market. Now, in the recent past, we've gone the path of privatizing the coal sector, where a lot of, again, fears are that we'll lock it in further. I was just curious about when you're looking at the long-term transition, how do you situate the role of the private sector? And particularly in a way where it doesn't enable us to get too locked into conventional sources.
No, that's why I had this last AI slide. I think that there would have to be further innovation in connecting, so there is no time lag. And discoms can suffer because suddenly the solar comes in and your customers go out and you have solar rooftops, and so it's very difficult to manage with that kind of uncertainty without tools. So you need tools and a regulatory system. I think we had a fairly good regulatory system so far, but whether it will keep up the challenge with the new problems that arise will arise when this large scale renewable energy is taking over in an uncertain, fluctuating sense. So that has to be invested. The transmission corridors are sometimes empty. The ones who have sent out the electricity 8 hours for 8 hours from Kutch and so on, and after that is nothing coming and going. That's not the way transmission lines work. So all that has to be managed.
I think she has answered. Professor Parikh has answered the question. It is a challenge. I mean, there's no point hiding away. In fact, there was the diagram which her presentation showed, which is two inverted, one U curve and one curve going up. That tells you the story. So there's no point hiding from this fact. But I think AI, going to the next question alongside, AI can help because this whole smart grid can very much be integrated with AI, and that's how it would work. So but
Yeah.
we are not there as it. We are not there, and we'll have to
Oh,
quickly move on.
dispersed and numerous sources. That's what will
Exactly.
happen. And we are used to have a small number of power plants, maybe few hundred, and that's manageable. But yeah, now we are talking about theoretically millions. So
That is why I gave the analogy of YouTube or social media, where every producer is a consumer and every consumer, of course, we are not reached there, but still a consumer, whatever is the word, the prosumer, a consumer is also a producer. So to manage that, just like the social media, this is also going to be a difficult thing because there's going to be a lot of cross traffic. So managing congestion, managing the grid is going to be a challenge.
And also to encourage, sometimes we take very extreme measures and give more subsidies. But then long term, if you can't withdraw, that would be very difficult because solar right now is you are not charging consumers, for transmission. You're not charging for. How do these things survive? Not charging for. Even the incentives given are very large.
Right.
So Surya Ghar and so on. It's good demonstration and getting people activated and motivated. But finally, at some point, it should be said, this is Yojana number 1 and Yojana is finished. So that.
Yes.
There's a follow-up question in the chat since we talked about AI, and even I'm curious about this. Badri sir has highlighted that AI is also a huge energy guzzler. And incidentally, since you mentioned the idea of subsidies, currently India is trying to court big tech to set up large AI centers here and giving them subsidies. So on the one hand, it seems like a double-edged sword, right? The use of AI to try and rationalize and make our energy sector more efficient. On the other hand, the cost of AI, the energy cost of AI. So how do you look at balancing these? Dr. Anand, if you could respond to this first again from a macroeconomic perspective. I know it's a tough question, but
yeah, this is a tough question going forward because data centers are going to be gas guzzlers or sorry, energy guzzlers. There's no question about that. Just to for us, it's very easy to put on the chat a simple question and it'll go to some data center located somewhere and it'll churn data. And if we do it on commercial scale, it means a lot of energy consumption. I think I have some estimate somewhere, but maybe we'll talk about that later. But I don't have a ready answer for this. One of the ways of doing it is integrate data centers along with energy production. There's no way. In fact, even in the case of RE, one of the ways which probably there's some consensus that these need to be integrated parks. You cannot have standalone parks because already integrating production with storage is more or less a settled issue. Similarly, huge producers should also become consumers should also become producers, and data centers are going to be one. I mean, that's an off-the-cuff kind of a reply. I don't have a pat answer for this.
no, it's a fair response considering that that's what's being proposed even from the water consumption standpoint, right? To set up desalination to ensure that our local water supply isn't affected. But sorry, Professor Parikh, your response to this question as well, please.
We have to stop thinking that politicians can offer electricity free and discount.
Exactly.
If they come at their cost, or they put their captive power plant, or they work out market arrangements. They should help Indian markets rather than we subsidize them. That is just not done. I mean, free electricity is an issue that's totally unnecessary and has caused enormous problems in India's development.
Before we wrap up, and we're already over time, but this has been such a great discussion. I just wanted to give both our speakers like a minute or two to just, if there are any final takeaways that you'd like to share with our audience about how they must view this energy transition looking forward.
Well, I've been long in climate change, and I would say we have to do things our way, not decarbonize because it's a fashionable thing to do, but do it for clean energy, do it for clean reducing energy dependence, do it for affordability, giving people a chance to grow, all these other causes first. After that, but certainly we have to choose efficiency as much as we can. Oh, what happened here?
Thank you so much, Professor Parikh. Dr. Anand?
I think she was saying something
Oh,
more.
sorry. Sorry, my apologies. Professor Parikh, was there anything else you were adding?
No, thanks.
Okay. Yes, India has to, as I say, do it my way or go my way. We have to do it that way. Otherwise, we will go by fashions of the day, which I think will be a problem. But we should have our goals clearly set on reducing emissions. But one thing I would just like to add, India has perhaps needs now a cadre of people who can be very fairly comfortable with both engineering, economics, and a broad-based approach to dealing with the energy sector. I mean, we can't afford to have completely skewed methods of dealing with a unidisciplinary kind of a thing. And energy is one sector which requires multiple competencies. So I think that's just an add-on that I would like to say. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present my views on this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anand and Professor Parikh. This has been such an enlightening morning and now afternoon. Once again, cannot thank you enough for those incredibly detailed PowerPoint presentations with so much information and statistics. I know a couple of people in the chat have asked if at some point those can be publicly shared. Perhaps that's something, please let us know if we can help you with. I'm sure it'll be a vital resource for policymakers as well as the average citizen who's curious to know about this. And once again, thank you to all our viewers for logging in today, especially to all those who posted thoughtful questions to engage with our speakers. And yeah, this has been another fantastic edition, and we look forward to hosting another panel next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
So, just for our participants, I want to thank our entire team, which has been supportive, Mr. Sadiq, Anekdhara, who made the posters. And of course, for the next webinar, we will have it on 31st May. The theme will be Iran's resilience, leveraging geography, energy again, and the asymmetric power. We hope to see you all again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. It was wonderful listening to you. Learned a lot.
Thank you. You have a lot of details. Thank you.
Thank you.